Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project. Now a couple of years ago when I was making my Cicada bustle gown, I decided to try and make silk roses out of tools that I had around the house because I didn't have proper flower making tools, but I wanted perfectly matching flowers. So I used a melon baller, some tweezers, and cobbled together these roses. And I'm still really happy with how those roses came out, and it's definitely a technique I would turn to again. But this time I don't have to because I get to play with the proper flower making tools. Because I've since gone and invested in an actual flower making iron tool thing. It's like a little handheld, not like a curling iron, not like a hot knife with like different attachments on the end so you could heat up the little different shapes of tools to make your flower petals. Clearly I don't know the proper names for the tools or the terminology for flower making. This actually is a rather large hobby, but in other parts of the world. So I have had some trouble finding information on how to do these things in English. So it's a lot of just looking at pictures in Japanese or Russian books where I can't read anything that's going on. So I'm just trying to infer what's happening from the photographs and do my best. There's not a ton of video tutorials out there on how to do this in English either. So, and not that I'm trying to like fill the void because I don't know what I'm doing, but it would be nice if someone could point me to where the void has been filled. But I have found a method for making roses that I'm quite happy with, and it seems very consistent in its results and very repeatable, which is good because I need to make a bunch of these. Let's go ahead and dive on in and I'll show you what I've been up to. Now the list of materials you'll need to make these roses today is nearly identical to the roses I made last time. I'm going to be working with real silk taffeta fabric. You can either use tissue taffeta or regular taffeta, just probably not heavyweight or ribbed taffeta. I tried to use ribbed taffeta and it was too thick, so medium to thin weight taffeta fabric. You can also use other weaves, charmeuse, satin, velvet. The more skill and experience you gain in this craft, the more different types of fabric you're comfortable working with. And I do think you can actually use these techniques with rayon, acetate, and also cottons as well. I just think that the process is a little bit different and I have not worked with any of those fabrics yet myself. I will also be using some paper and cardstock to cut out patterns for my flower petals. I'll be using cotton balls to fill the centers of my roses today. I will be using floristry wire. I'll link the exact wire I've been using in the description below. And this is a pretty basic PVA white glue here. This is an archival variety. I try and buy acid-free, just basic PVA glue for working with this. I'm going to be using that glue to glue the flowers together later on, but also to stiffen my fabric, which is going to be my first real step for this. And of course I have different pairs of scissors for both cutting the fabrics out and for cutting the paper. I will also be using some tea light candles later to heat up my tweezers, just like last time. But yes, the first step here is to really, it feels absolutely sacrilegious, soak my silk fabric in a solution of 3 cups water to 1/3 cup PVA glue. So that's what I have here. I used warm water, just dissolve that glue in there, 1/3 cup of glue to 3 cups water. Then I just go ahead and scrunch my fabric in there, make sure the whole thing gets saturated, wring out as much as I can, and then I hang these up with pant hangers and just hang them to dry for a few hours. Here in Colorado is enough, but overnight if you are in a more humid area perhaps. Another little tip with this is if you're going to be soaking different colors of fabric, to start with the lightest color to avoid the sort of red sock in the laundry sort of effect here, where if you were soaking a red fabric first and then you put a white fabric in, it might get a tinge, just depending on if the dye bleeds at all from the fabric. So just be careful about the order you're soaking your fabrics if you're working with different colors. Now I'll be making 2 different sizes of roses, and for that I have 3 different templates. The medium template here basically serves as the small petal for the large flowers and as the large petal for the smaller flowers. So 3 templates. I will need 4 smaller petals and 6 larger petals for each rose. So if I'm using this medium size here, I will need 6 of these cut out of my fabric and then 4 of the smaller petals to create my smaller sized rose. To cut these out, I just tear my fabric into strips and fold it sort of accordion style back and forth, line up my cardstock stencil like so, and then cut out around the edges. And in making sure my template is lined up with the strip, that means my petals will be on the bias when this shape is cut out. So you're going to want to cut out a bunch of these if you want to make a bunch of roses. Again, 4 small petals and 6 large petals for each rose here. Here are some small petals that I've already slightly curled and some medium-sized petals here for some yellow roses. But I'll be working with this sort of mahogany red color silk for the rest of this video, well, for the most part today. For each of these petals, I do need to slice them close to the center here, so I'm just folding them in half twice to find where the center of the petal is, and then I'm going to cut all the way down towards the center, but not through it. So I'm leaving about a 1/4 inch radius circle in the center of the petal, so cutting towards the center, but staying about a 1/4 inch away from it, just so that these are still connected, which will make folding them into the shape we need later easier. Now I'm going to choose a half round head for my tool. These round ends come in several different sizes. I'm just choosing one that corresponds with the petal size. The larger the petal, the larger the round shape you want to do. Just something that fits within the size of the petal. You don't want something bigger than the petal. It won't get it curly enough. And I almost think an iron head that's a little bit too small would probably give you better results than one that's a little too large. But I'm just going to take my hot little round iron here and press each petal in the center like this, moving it around a little bit, zhuzhing it around to give each petal a cupped shape like so. So for the 4 smaller petals that are going to make up the center of my rose, I'm going to cup all 4 petals the same direction like so. So I'm just cupping each petal individually. You can pick up the corner of the foam mat here that comes with most of these tools. At least it came with my tool. I think hopefully you can get additional foam mats because I'm going to need another one after all these flowers that I've been making recently. But yes, all 4 of the smaller petal rounds you want to curl in this same direction. Now for our 6 slightly larger petals, I'm going to fold and cut them in the same exact way. So I'm going to be processing the petals the same way to start with here, and then I will go ahead and iron them differently. I will be using the same size of iron for this, but because these petals are a little bit larger and the ironing pattern is a little bit different, we're going to get a different shape result on these petals. So once I have those cut, I'm going to go ahead and do the corners of these petals. So I'm going to do the top 2 corners like so, and the bottom 2 corners. I'll slow this down for you in a moment. Then I will flip the petal and do the opposite on the other side. I'm going to press into the top 2 sides of the petal here and the bottom 2 ends of the petal. I will then flip it over and press the iron into the other 2 ends of the petal, basically creating this sort of reversed petal shape, a wavy petal shape on all of these. And when you start to fold these later to shape the rose, the concaves and the convexes meet each other. Instead of aligning with each other, they're opposites. So it really creates a rather full and ruffled looking petal, which will help create the more natural look of our rose later. I'm going to process all 6 of these petals in that way. And then I'm going to take all my petals over to my desk where I will heat up some tweezers over a candle here. There are tools that come as part of the set that you can do this part with, but I just haven't been able to get the same effect that I can get with these tweezers. The tweezers give the best effect, and therefore I have been sitting over here at my desk for hours on end, curling many petals. But for the 4 central smaller petals of our rose, just as we cupped them all in the same direction, we're going to curl the petals all back in the same direction. And then for the 6 outer petal circles, I'm going to curl the north and south petals under, and then I will again flip the round over and do the east and west in the opposite direction. So if the north and south are curling under, I'm going to go ahead and curl the east and west up. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully using cardinal directions kind of makes sense on this, because luckily there are 4 petals on each of these roses. What will I do when we eventually talk about peonies? I don't know. But once I have curled all my petal edges with my tweezers, I can go ahead and start assembling my rose. Now I have a little bit of that PVA glue poured into a sake cup of all things, because it's what I had around, but you can put that glue in anything, honestly. A small, tiny little bowl, a ramekin, something that will hold your glue for you. And luckily it does dry quite quickly, which is actually useful for our project today. I'm going to take a piece of the floristry wire and go ahead and bend it in half so I have this little loop, and that is where I will secure our piece of cotton here. I'm going to take a cotton ball and kind of unwind it to get a strip of cotton basically. I'm going to go ahead and create a little cone shape by winding this through and around my wire end like so. I don't even need any glue for this to happen, because cotton fibers are actually a spiral shape if you were to look at them under a microscope. They do stick to themselves quite well. And again, I will need 4 of the smaller petals that we processed all in the same direction, and then 6 of the slightly larger petals that are more ruffled. And for each of the 4 petals, I will go ahead and use my awl to poke a hole in the center of these so we can feed them onto the wires of our little cotton bud here. And I'll feed the first petal on, and this one is going to end up being the very center of our rose, so it's going to be closed up completely. So I'll cover the first petal entirely with glue and use it to wind a little peak around our cotton ball to completely cover that so it won't be seen. So I'm just making sure this is all glued shut. None of this will be seen eventually. It just is the very center of our rose, and so our petals are going to be wound quite tightly around this as if it were a real rose that hadn't fully opened up all the way. I'll add glue all over the second petal as well and fold that one up, cupping around that first petal, and then these other 2 on the other side again will overlap as I cup them up around the center. But this is, where we're going to be using the most glue, because this needs to be the tightest portion of our rose here. And after I get these petals twisted into the correct shape, you'll see me kind of wind it and twist it around in my hand, using my thumb and first finger to really hold this in shape while it is drying. The glue does dry pretty quickly, but you do have to hold it for a couple of seconds. So I recommend holding it for a little bit longer than you think you need to, just so that the glue has a little bit of time to set. I, again, luckily live in Colorado where it is very dry and things dry quite quickly. So that probably helped me along in this process. But I will feed on another set of petals here and flip each one up one by one, making sure I overlap the last petal a little bit with the next one each time so they kind of spiral outwards like a real flower would. And again, I'm kind of pinching that between my thumb and my finger and pulling on the stem just to give that a little bit of tension as this sets into place and that glue starts to dry. Then for my third petal, I again will be doing the same thing. The first two petal discs, I add quite a bit of glue, and then the second two petal discs here, this being the third one, I'm just going to add glue mostly at the bottom third of this, and then in the last petal, I'll even add a little bit less glue. That's just so that this starts to open up a little bit more. Each petal has a little bit more freedom to open up and rustle in the breeze if there were one. But again, just pinching that in my hand, turning it a little bit as that glue sets. And this is basically how you create a rose bud, as you can see. If you were just to leave it at this step, it looks a bit like a rose bud. Perfect. But I'll string on this last small circle of petals here. Once again, I'm going to find where I left off with the last seam, I guess, from the last round, and just overlap these, spiraling as I go around, so that each petal overlaps the last about a third of the way, if not half of the way, like so. And again, just turning that in my hand. I'm just going to hold this here for a couple. I've spent a lot of time just holding a flower for 30 seconds in the last couple of weeks here, because it does feel like I've been making flowers for ages now. As far as processing the other 6 petals here, we're going to take each of these, put a little bit of glue on that and fold it in half, and then one more dab of glue and fold it in half again. Now, you don't want to fold these in half perfectly. You want them to kind of be asymmetric, because we do want this to have a naturalistic effect, and we don't want it to be too symmetrical in that way. But each of these, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on here down in the center and then fold it in half and half again. I will just pinch these until the glue sets and dries a little bit as well. And I'll go ahead and process all 6 petals in that same way. And I'll take my rosebud here, and we can start attaching these other buddies here. So I'm going to add glue to about the bottom fourth of this, just the bottom point of that, and I will hold it on to my rosebud. I'm going to hold that in place again for probably a good 30 seconds, if not a little bit longer, like so. And then the next petal, I'll do the same, put a little bit of glue on the end here. And again, I'm going to go ahead and slightly overlap this over the last petal shape I put on here and hold it in place. I'm just going to spiral around all the way back to the start again, adding on each of these petals. Now, last time the rose I made, I had individual petals and I was sewing them all together, and I definitely still think that works. The reason I changed techniques wasn't necessarily because I went from using the sort of home tools to the more professional flower making tools. That's not the reason I chose to change the style of rose. I am changing to this style of rose because it is quicker to produce them. To hand sew those other silk roses together and to individually shape every single petal on like that kind of time scale would have meant that this took me, would have taken me months and months to make a couple dozen flowers. And for this project I'm working on, I did want, a couple dozen roses, and I needed to be able to make several a day as opposed to just making 2 or 3. And the green roses I made in that other method definitely did take longer than these. As I said, I really like this method for a very lifelike rose, but that is something that is very repeatable. You have 4 petals like this, 6 petals like this, you put them together the same way every time and you get a consistent result, which I really appreciated. So I'm using the same fabric, silk taffeta, for all my roses that I'm going to be making for this upcoming project, and they've all come out very similar, which is nice. But once I finish spiraling my petals on, again, I'm just going to hold this until it really sets, and then I can actually move my petals around a little bit and fluff up my rose a little bit here. I'm going to finish the back with a little star-shaped piece of green silk here, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. Cutting this out along the bias of a square of silk here in this lovely olive green color. It took me forever to find the correct color of olive green silk for this project that matched the other greens I was using in this project. This is actually a yellow and black cross-woven iridescent silk, and that's what gives this lovely warm olive sheen. It's actually not an olive green silk, it's a yellow and black silk, and it took me ages to figure out where I could get this color, and I finally had to order it directly from India. I will link the sources where I got my silks below, by the way. You can use this other sort of shaped foot to shape this. I find that it works really well, but since I already have my round end heated up on this iron, I'll go ahead and use that to shape this buddy. And I'll just process this almost like a petal, kind of rounding the center part of it and trailing off the tips of my calyx, I think these are called, whatever the bottom of a rose is called. Sorry, botanists in the audience. I'm just going to round the tips into the opposite direction, like so. And then once again, I will use my awl to poke a center into this so I can feed it onto the wires. And again, I'll just grab a little bit of glue there. This paintbrush is absolutely thrashed. It is now a glue tool instead of a paintbrush. It started life as a paintbrush, but a paintbrush I knew would be sacrificed to this activity. But I'll feed this buddy on here. Again, kind of pinch and hold that in place so that it sets onto the back of my flower, like so. Now, of course, these wires coming on my rose are really nice for being able to position it and wire it onto something or move it around and pose it, but they're not very attractive. So we're going to go ahead and cover that wire with a piece of matching silk. This is just a 1/2 inch wide strip of silk that's been cut on the 45-degree angle on the bias. I'll throw a little bit of glue on there, and we're going to wind this around the stem, the wires, to create our stem just the same way I was using the floral tape the last time I made flowers. This time I just wanted, instead of the floral tape, to use something that matched the green of the foliage I'd be using on the rest of the project, so that the stems would match, basically. But I just pinch that at the end here to get it going, and then start twisting my rose while I move my way down the stem. You get kind of a rhythm with this. You kind of twist the flower, and that little bit of glue on here helps hold all this shut. And as you twist and pull the flower away and kind of pinch it, this is really hard to explain. Hopefully you can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm twirling this along the glued piece of ribbon, like so, basically. Just hold that closed a little bit again as that dries. And now we at least have a stem that matches but still maintains its posability, which is quite nice. Of course, I haven't actually made any leaves for this buddy yet, and I'm behind on my leaf making. In general, I have not practiced my leaves as much as I have been practicing my roses, so I need to catch up. I have, just tonight, actually, as I'm working on this video, I have cut out about, 40 leaves or so, because I need to process about 1 billion leaves to go with my dozens of flowers. I'm going to cut out a rough leaf shape here and cut a couple of notches into it. I will have some leaf templates along with the rose petal templates linked below in the description if you would like to download them and print them off as opposed to drawing them yourself. I'm just going to use this sort of wedge knife, almost looks like a clay sculpting tool, end on my iron here to give this leaf a couple of notches on either side, and then I'll glue a piece of wire to each of these. This is the same floral wire I used at the start. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on there, hold it onto the back of my leaf, and just pinch that into place. Need a little bit more glue here. There we go. Like so. Are these perfect rose leaves? No. It seems like a lot of the leaves on these sort of projects get quite stylized, and I haven't really quite decided or figured out what my style of leaf is yet. So, this is an evolution. I'm just learning how to make roses. I am not necessarily an expert yet, but I think that these ones came out quite nice. Now I'm just going to repeat this sort of stem winding process with silk to attach these leaves as well and create a little bit of a thicker stem. So I'm just going to hold the leaf where I want, and again, pinch a little bit of that bias cut silk like so around the start of the leaf and wind it down a little bit, and then I will attach another leaf. Rose leaves actually come in sort of sets of 3 or 5 usually, just if you want to make more accurate rose leaves than I am doing here. I'm just sticking a couple of leaves on here to finish off this display rose, as it were. I think I might turn this one into a brooch by just sewing a pin back or gluing a pin back onto the back of it. And you can see I have lots of pieces of paper here. They're all different templates for different petals and shapes for flowers you will be seeing in the near future. But here is my finished silk rose for today. Of course, you can bend this stem in any which way you may need or want to. And now I just need to make about 2 or 3 dozen more of these. So yes, I'm building up a pile of these finished roses, and I need to experiment with other flowers next. I might try making peonies, chrysanthemums, and little bellflowers are the things I'm most interested in. I'd really like to make like a poisonous flower garden out of silk. I would like to turn to some poisonous flowers, but they're not always the easiest sort of thing to translate into silk, I think. I might be able to make some like hellebore. So if you know of any good poisonous flowers I might be able to recreate in silk, link those below or let me know below, because I would like to give more poisonous flowers a try just to tuck in with these roses, because of course I would like to have a dangerous bouquet more than anything. And of course I'll be sharing with you what all these flowers are for and what project they will be decorating in another video soon. But I hope you enjoyed this video today, and thank you so much as always for watching. I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!